likewise, Father, we ask that you bless this fruit of the vine, which represents to us the blood that was shed on the cross. Again, Father, we pray that we take this in a way pleasing to you. In Christ's name, amen.
If you're using your songbooks this morning, you might want to place your markers at 272. That would be the song following the lesson this morning. And then we'll sing number 11 in the supplement. I will wake the dawn with praises. Number 11. Number 67 in the supplement. The song before the lesson this morning, if it's comfortable for you to join me in standing as we sing this song before the lesson. I love you, Lord.
Well, good morning to you. Glad to see you out. We've got visitors. We're especially glad that you're here. And hope you'll join with us this morning for a little period of study, and hopefully it'll be edifying and help us become closer to God. There was a time maybe through the 1960s where just about, or you was hard pressed to find a movie in which somebody didn't get stuck in quicksand. I mean, it's like everywhere you turn, somebody's going to get stuck in quicksand. It's just the way it was. I don't know what the fascination was at that point in time, but that's the way it is. I mean, it even made it into the old Adam West Batman series. Somebody was getting stuck in quicksand. And while the depiction of quicksand in movies is not always very accurate, there's some properties of quicksand that I'd like to pay attention to this morning. And what I'd like to do is compare that quicksand to sin. You know, quicksand is usually encountered in situations where somebody's, going through the woods, exploring or hiking or something like that. And so naturally you're usually going through some kind of rough terrain. Well, you may come up on a spot and it's like, well, hey, there's not much vegetation there. It looks pretty flat. Everything looks good. So that looks like a good place to walk. I get me 100 feet or so of easy travel. But you take a couple steps in, and something's not exactly right. So the first attribute of quicksand that I'd like to bring our attention to is the fact that it's attractive. it's not anything, when you see it, it's not intimidating. It looks easy. Everything about it looks fine. So something you may want to try and somewhere you may want to walk. But once you take a couple steps in and you sink in a little bit, you realize this is not good. There's something a little different here. And you all know, if you've ever gotten stuck in mud or something like that, you know what that is. It kind of starts pulling at you. The more you move, the further you go. And so it really starts to suck you in and grabs you, and it's getting really, really hard to get out of that quicksand. Well then, and like I said, while depictions in movies and television shows and things like that sometimes aren't very accurate, quicksand can be very, very deadly. It may not suck you down below your head, over your head and all that kind of thing. But if you get stuck and you get to the point where you can't pull out, I've heard it said that it takes, just to pull straight out of quicksand, it takes as much force as it does to lift a small car. So I mean, it's very powerful. So if you get stuck in that quicksand and you can't get out, there's all kind of things that can happen to you at that time. Dehydration, starvation, exposure, or maybe even a wild animal can get to you, and there's nothing you can do about it. So quicksand can be very deadly. So those are the things I want to compare quicksand to when in regards to sin. Sin can be very attractive. It can be very addictive. It can suck you in. But it can also be very deadly. So first, let's take a look at how attractive sin can be. If we're honest with ourselves, we have to admit, sin is pleasurable. The flesh enjoys sin. Whether it be sexual endeavors, we're talking drugs, we're talking drinking, or, whatever the thing may be, these things are pleasurable. That's what makes it so attractive. That's why we're tempted. That's why we're pulled toward these type of things. If it's not pleasurable, you're not going to do it. You're not going to go toward this type of thing. Our bodies feel good when we do these things, and so we're attracted to this, and that's why we want to do this. And we get that satisfaction from doing the things that we want to do. We start thinking about material things and gaining money, and to be able to do the things we want to do, being able to travel, being able to buy the vehicles we want, being able to be in the house that we want, being able to have the status that we want. We start getting in that mindset of, the more money that we can get, the happier we're going to be, because we're able to obtain these things and we're able to do the things we want to do. And of course, all that satisfaction that we get, it feels good. It's attractive to us, and that's where we start focusing on. That's what we start looking toward for our satisfaction. I'm hoping you're thinking about Solomon, because Solomon addresses these things very directly in the book of Ecclesiastes. In particular, Ecclesiastes chapter 2, starting in verse 9. We all know the background of Solomon. He was the ultimate experimenter, and it seems like I end up mentioning Solomon every time I speak, but he was able to explore this life more than anybody ever did, because he had the power, he had the wisdom, and he had the money. He could do everything. He could test everything out. So in Ecclesiastes chapter 2, starting in verse 9, Solomon says, "So I became great and excelled more than all who were before me in Jerusalem. Also my wisdom remained with me. Whatever my eyes desired, I did not keep from them. I did not withhold my heart from any pleasure, for my heart rejoiced in all my labor. And this was my reward for all my labor." So he was able to obtain all these things. He's able to do all these things. And he obtained joy from this. He got a reward. He enjoyed it. And, it's just human nature for us to want to take pride in the things that we're able to accomplish and the things that we're able to do. We see the things he accomplished, the building projects that he did. We start looking at the pyramids. We start looking at, airplanes. That's just almost a miracle to us until we understand the science. It's just these things, we start taking pride in this type of thing, and we just keep pulling and focusing on those type of things. And so all of our confidence becomes built up in this thing. And that's exactly what happened with Solomon. But it becomes so easy for us to focus on those things that bring us to satisfaction that we forget about the things that's needed and the things that we need to do. And so in verse 11, Solomon tells us, brings all that to a definite conclusion. He says, "Then I looked on all the works that my hands had done, and on the labor which I had toiled. And indeed, all was vanity and grasping for the wind. There was no profit under the sun." So he was trying to gain all the satisfaction. He was trying to, he tried everything. And I believe this included sinful things as well, more than likely, as we see as things happen with his wives and things later on. But he tries to make the point that these pleasures, the pleasures of sin and all these things, are a temporary fulfillment of this satisfaction. I'm sure it brings to mind Moses, as what's mentioned to Moses in Hebrews chapter 11, in verse 25. It says, "By faith Moses, when he became of age, refused to be called the son of Pharaoh's daughter, choosing rather to suffer the affliction of the people of God than to enjoy the passing pleasures of sin." And so those things, the sinful things, were attractive to Moses. That pulled it toward him. And you see the movies that depict the possibilities of things, of the kind of life he may have had, being there, raised in Pharaoh's kingdom. But he was able to see past that. He was able to see the things of value and saw that was a passing pleasure. That was not the fulfillment. And so he was able to resist the attraction that sin had for it. But there's no denying that sinful things are attractive to us, that it pulls us toward these things. But sin's not only attractive, it's very, very, it's not only pleasurable. That's not the only thing that makes it attractive. The other thing that makes it attractive is that it's very popular. Most people are going to follow their own desires, and it says that explicitly in Titus chapter 3 and verse 3, when Paul is telling Timothy to remind them of the things that they've done, and one of those things is giving in to their desires, their sinful desires, and all that kind of thing. Most people are going to do the things that make them feel good. Most people are too selfish to stand up against these desires. Most people are going to give in. Most people are going to do what they want to do and do the things that feels good to them. And going with the flow is just the easy thing to do. If everybody around you is doing something, it's way easier just to go along with that flow. It's hard to paddle upstream, right? So it's so much easier just to go with what everybody else is doing. And why is that? Have you ever noticed we don't like standing out? As much as everybody always says, I want to be unique and all this kind of stuff that's going through. Human nature is we want to fit in. We want to go with the crowd. We want to do what everybody else is doing. Because it doesn't matter what it is. If you're unique in something or if you stand out, you're going to receive some ridicule. We don't like ridicule. Humans do not like to be ridiculed. And so we're not willing to stand out and be different. And we feel like fitting in gets us into places like that. I believe it was Wes that told me a story about a young man that was wanting to get into sales, with equipment. We're talking big money in these sales. And so, he was kind of getting ready, and he was talking to somebody, and somebody stopped him and said, "Now, hang on." He said, I know you're kind of a pretty good guy. Are you willing to take these clients to strip clubs? Are you willing to take them out drinking? Are you willing to do this and that and able to get that sale? And of course, the young man was not willing. He was able to, resist that and said, "No, that's not what I want to get into." But that is what you're pressured to do in certain situations, in the work world and everywhere else. And so you feel like you're giving up things to go against the crowd and to be different and to stand apart. And so that's not within our nature. We do not want to stand out and be different. So most people are going to do what they feel, or most people are going to do what makes them feel good. And most people are going to give in to their desires. Most people are going to go with the flow. But Jesus said most people are going to hell. In Matthew 7, verse 13, Jesus says, "Enter by the narrow gate, for wide is the gate, and broad is the way that leads to destruction, and there are many who go in by it." It's a hard statement, but most people are going to hell. And that's not where we want to be. We don't want to be most people. But did you notice the other way, the way it describes the way in that verse? It says, "Wide is the gate, and broad is the way." Some translations may even say, "Easy is the way." That's the other thing that makes sin very attractive. It's easy. There's no effort involved in being, it doesn't take effort to be in sin. People by nature are lazy. We're going to do the least we can do to get by with things. Just if we do things the way we just feel like doing it. We're going to do the least we can get by with. I'm going to mow my yard as few times as possible. I'm going to wait till I can bale hay with it to mow it. You know, we're going to do different things. We're going to take the path of least resistance. That's just our nature. And we just look at life as a set of requirements. It's like, I got to eat my 3 square meals a day. I got to sleep 8 hours. I need to go to work so I can pay for my stuff. I got to go to church 3 times a week. It's just boxes to check. And that's the way we as human, just the human nature looks at things. And you know, we feel like as long as those boxes are checked, we're golden, we're good, everything is fine. It's just going through life in neutral. But if you'll be turning to Matthew chapter 25, we'll see that when you put your life in neutral, you don't necessarily just sit still. Matthew chapter 25 is the parable of the talents, where we have one servant given 10 talents. And he takes those 10 talents and he makes 10 more talents. Got another servant who is given 2 talents. He takes those 2 talents and makes 2 more talents. Then what happens with the third servant? He's given 1 talent, goes and buries it in the ground, and just sits on it. And when the master comes back, he says, "Here, master, here's your talent. I hadn't lost your talent. Everything's fine. We're good. We're neutral." How did the master feel about that talent, about that servant, and how he handled his talent? Verse 25. Starting in verse 26. "But his Lord answered and said to him, 'You wicked and lazy servant, you knew what I reap, and where you knew that I reap where I have not sown, and gather where I have not scattered seed. So you ought to have deposited the money with the bankers, and at my coming I would have received back my own with interest. Therefore take the talent from him and give it to him who has 10 talents. For everyone who has, more will be given, and he will have abundance. But from him who does not have, even what he has will be taken away. And cast the unprofitable servant into the outer darkness, where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth.'" So this I'm not even going to try to say that word. This lack of caring that this servant exhibited was not greeted lightly by the master. It was taken as a serious offense by the master that this servant didn't think enough of what he was given to go and try to do something with it. The servant just thought, well, you know, as long as I don't lose what I got, I'll be okay. But that's not the way the master saw it. This mentality of neutrality, I think I got that out, was not accepted by the master. But we think as long as we do nothing, nothing's going to happen and everything's going to be okay. And we get satisfied with that. As long as we're not losing, we're satisfied and we're happy. But unfortunately, they are dead wrong, as we saw in this scripture. He was cast into the outer darkness. There's a quote by Will Rogers that said, even if you're on the right track, you'll get run over if you just sit there. And so, just sitting by, not doing anything, it's not acceptable, but it's so easy. And that's why so many people are attracted to sin. But sin is not only attractive to us. Once we get involved, it gets very addictive. If we think about the quicksand, the deeper you go, the harder it is to get out. The way quicksand works is if you just sit still, you're going to be okay. But if you start panicking and moving around and all that, it gets it moved and unsettled, and it just pulls you down deeper and deeper and deeper until you get to a point to where you're not getting out without help. And that's the way sin works. Let's look at James chapter 1. James chapter 1, starting in verse 15. Then when desire has conceived, it gives birth to sin. And sin, when it is full grown, brings forth death. Do not be deceived, my beloved brethren. So, once we get involved in sin, if we don't jump right back out, we're going to be pulled in, and it's going to be harder and harder to do. We know pleasure. Pleasure is so addicting. We talked about how pleasurable sin is. When we enjoy something, we want more of it. And then, but eventually it's the passing pleasures of sin, right? So we do something that we enjoy, and it wears off. And so we want to do it again. And so we want to go back for more. We start going back. And I know y'all have experienced this. Anything like that, it starts... it takes more to get the same effect. It's not just drugs. It's anything. We can be talking about cake. It's something as innocent as cake. But it takes more to get the same effect. And so, and that effect wears off, well, then I eat the same amount. That don't satisfy. I need more. And so you start doing more and you start doing more. And it just gets deeper and deeper and deeper. And you wiggle and you sink. And you get so grabbed in that there is no coming out. And so, and if something gets in the way of receiving that experience, we'll start doing anything to get it. We'll start doing other wrong things, and we start lying or stealing or whatever it takes to be able to experience that thing again. We'll go whatever measure it takes to get to it. And so it's very, very addicting and grabs you in. And another thing that happens when you're doing all this is think about your conscience. That conscience starts getting seared. It starts getting callous. Let's just think about lying for a second. Let's say you're supposed to be doing your homework and your mom comes by and says, "Hey, have you done your homework?" You said, "No, yeah, I've done my homework," and you hadn't even looked at it. You think that's something small, but it bugs you. You may even go as far as to go back and tell you, "Mom, I hadn't done my homework. I'm sorry. I'm going to go do it now." It really bugs you. But then you do it again. Bugs you a lot less. You do it again. Bugs you a lot less. And then you start lying about other things because, before long, you'll climb a tree to tell a lie before you stand on the ground and tell the truth. So your conscience gets seared, and it builds a tolerance to where it cares less and less about these things. And so then the less that the conscience cares about it, the more likely you are to keep doing it. And so searing that conscience is a very dangerous thing for our souls. And so the addictive nature of sin is very, very strong and very gripping and very difficult to escape. And once you get to that point where you can't escape, it becomes very, very deadly, as we know. You know, we mentioned the different ways that the quicksand can be lethal the deeper it has you. But sin is obviously the same way. Sin can be very deadly to us. It can be physically deadly. We know the effects that, you know, drugs and alcohol can have on your body. You know, if you know, too much, an overdose or something like that, it can kill you. It can influence you in such a way to where when you're driving, that you're a very dangerous driver. You know, you have an accident, you kill yourself, you kill somebody else. You know, STDs can be very deadly and dangerous, and so sin can be very physically dangerous to our bodies. But what's even much, much more concerning is that it's spiritually deadly. That separation from God. God cannot dwell with sin. So if you've got sin, God cannot dwell with you. You cannot be one of God's with sin. You think about the most holy place in the tabernacle. Think of, you know, even the high priest could only enter there once a year. And think about the process they had to go through to be able to do that. All the cleansing that they had to go through, the sacrifices and the blood sprinkling and the washing and, you know, everything they had to do to their robes, all the ordeal that it took for them just to be able to enter the symbolic presence of God. That's what that sin represents to us. That sin keeps God from being able to dwell in us. And that's somewhere we don't want to be. We do not want to be without God. Because if we are not with God, we are dead. And so when we really start to think about what has come about, we have decided that we're exchanging God for this passing pleasure of sin, this little stupid thing that we're hanging on to with dear life. We're giving up God for this. And so sin is incredibly deadly to us, both physically, but most importantly, deadly spiritually. And so sin, just look at sin like quicksand. It's something that we want to stay away from. Because if you get in, you'll sink deeper and deeper, and sometimes you don't even know. Sometimes you don't even realize that you've gotten into it. And then you start trying to struggle, and it just sucks you down and pulls you in. And I can tell you, you're not getting out by yourself. And you're not going to get out of sin by yourself. So just like all the old 60s movies and everything, you know, the Westerns, the guy gets about here in the quicksand, and sure enough, here comes somebody on a horse. Now, I don't know what the real answer is, but in the movies, there's always a rope. And he throws the rope and pulls you out of the quicksand. And the obvious parallel is Jesus has the rope. Because the wages of sin are death. So death, where there's sin, there's going to be death. But Jesus took the death. He provided the death. He died for us. He became, the word Romans likes to use, a propitiation. He paid the price. He made sure that justice was served. And so it's just up to us to grab the rope. We've got to grab the rope. And so I ask you this morning, if there's anything that needs to be done in your life to help you grab that rope. Maybe the rope slipped through your fingers. You had the rope and it slipped through your fingers. And you need to make your life right. This morning's the time to do it. Or if you've never grabbed the rope and it's laying there, you know you've got the rope. It's ready. And you just need to grab it. If there's any way we can help you with that this morning, then please come forward now as we stand and sing.
Amen.